education and vocational training earned her the prestigious Human Rights Award and Social Work Award by the United States government. She is a former senator and has served as a federal minister for human rights. Our distinguished panelists, we have today with us Mr. Daniel Ahmed. He is a communication and media strategist at the Pakistan Poverty Alleviation Fund. He has a master's degree in advertising and communication from the Bournemouth University, UK. And second panelist, Ms. Thamreez Khan is an independent development practitioner and researcher with over 25 years of experience in her field. Her talk will focus on labor migration and systemic resilience, using the case of Pakistan to highlight the important role of sending countries in the regulation of labor migration and protection of migrant workers abroad. And finally, we have Syed Hassan Irfan, who teaches community service and social entrepreneurship at the National Defense University in Islamabad. He is an entrepreneur specializing in philanthropy, poverty reduction, and public relations. His area of expertise include strategic planning, public speaking, leadership, and project management. Earlier, he was involved in various startup ventures, including Risk and PDX. Before I turn over to our panelists, let me just remind everyone that this is a 90-minute session. Each panelist will be given about 10 to 15 minutes to speak, and then we'll have a question and answer session at the end, and closing with the concluding remarks by our esteemed chairperson. So with that, let me turn over to our first panelist, Mr. Daniel. Over to you, please.
Thank you very much, Ms. Amina. I would like to share my screen to show the presentation. May I please request screen sharing so that I can share the presentation?
Daniel, please, can you check now?
Yes, thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Daniel Ahmed, as Ms. Amina has introduced me. I would like to thank SDPI and SDC committee for giving me this opportunity to present research findings of PPAF's work. As many of you may be aware, PPAF is the lead Pakistan Poverty Alleviation Fund. PPAF is the lead apex institution for community-driven development in the country. It started working in the year 2000. We serve the poorest and the most marginalized rural communities and households across the country with a presence in 147 districts. We support these communities to access improved infrastructure, energy, health, education, livelihoods, finance, and develop resistance to disasters. Today, I'll be representing on towards recovery of rural households, lessons from the COVID-19 response in Pakistan, which is a study that I conducted in the previous month. So with the onset of COVID-19, poor households and households with low socioeconomic conditions suffered the most throughout the world. And COVID-19 has also caused tremendous negative impacts on the livelihoods of the vulnerable population in Pakistan. Many people working in the informal sector or daily wages have lost their jobs and incomes due to the necessary measures taken to contain the spread of the pandemic. Consequently, the economic recovery was further slowed down due to during the third wave in March 2021, which made it challenging for the government of Pakistan to contain the effects of the pandemic on the vulnerable population. Even though currently the evidence suggests that with the ease of restriction, the economy may begin to recover in the short term. However, long-term effects of the poverty remain undetermined. This presentation will identify some of the impacts of COVID-19 on lives of marginalized populations. Then it will suggest growth-oriented policy measures to reconstruct the economy in the post-COVID era, focused on employment generation, controlling inflation, and increasing investment in social protection. So we'll start by giving some context of poverty around the globe, and then we'll move on to the local context with respect to Pakistan. The COVID-19 pandemic, of course, continues to impact the economy and human development globally, as reported by UNDP. In Bangladesh, the poverty rate increased from 14.4% to 18.1% in 2020. India was pushed back to poverty rates of those in 2016. Indonesia's upper middle income status was changed to lower middle income status as of July 2021. And this is just the story of the South Asian developing countries. But even if you look at the developing countries, they have also suffered a lot in this, with research suggesting trends in low middle income countries outside of South Asia, such as Nigeria, indicate that their economy, although has recovered right now, but 12 million people will be pushed into poverty from 2019 to 2023. Another study suggests that although high-income countries, although were able to manage the economic shocks of the COVID response, but still areas such as the San Francisco Bay Area in USA will roughly face 5% increase in poverty from 17% to 25% in the coming year. The president of the World Bank has claimed that the poverty effects of the pandemic could be felt for the upcoming 10 years. Pakistan has to manage high inflation and shocks such as local attacks and floods also during the while the COVID pandemic was going on, and it is still going on. Although the Pakistan tried to curb the number of cases, still it falls victims to extreme poverty caused by the pandemic. In addition to poverty hike, increase in the vulnerable population is also expected. This vulnerable population includes communities earning income just sufficient to keep them slightly above the poverty line, and longer periods of national economic instability will ultimately result in pushing them below the poverty line. Poor workers, especially those on daily wages with no savings, were affected the most. Almost half, 49% of population was badly affected due to closure of businesses. Even though it was smart, government imposed smart lockdowns, 37% either lost their job or could not work, 12% faced decrease in income. Approximately 53% household at national level reported a reduction in income, either earned or unearned. Around 10% households reported facing severe food insecurity, and 30% households reported moderate food insecurity during the first wave of COVID in Pakistan. This was a pretty drastic picture for the nation that they have to deal with during the COVID times. So moving on to the economic impact on Pakistan's most disenfranchised households, the Pakistan Poverty Alleviation Fund actually conducted a study through an independent consultant. We surveyed 423 poor and ultra poor households in 16 UCs across 8 districts and 4 provinces of Pakistan, which covers all of Pakistan almost. And these people were direct beneficiaries of National Poverty Graduation Program and Benazir Income Support Program. The study collected data from 3 time periods: before COVID, January to March 2020, during COVID, the first wave and lockdown, April to July 2020, and relaxation in lockdown, August to November 2020. So we collected information on the pandemic, socioeconomic well-being, adaptation to strategies used by the household, adverse consequences of macroeconomic shock, and role of the state during these shocks by the household. So starting with the income and expenditures, coming to the income and expenditures of the household that were surveyed, as we can clearly see in the table shown that the sectors that were affected the most were daily wage workers and people who had their own businesses. Although agriculture and livestock sector were affected and paid employment sector was affected, but they were able to recover very quickly compared to the other two sectors. Further, if you look at the provincial, the data distributed provincially, the maximum fall in monthly income has been seen in KPK, followed by Punjab, Sindh, and then Balochistan. Then we come to look at what measures were taken by the communities to dilute these impacts. The poor and the ultra poor household surveys reported adopting various measures to cope with the recent macroeconomic shocks. You can see how they were dealing with it. And in this table, buying less expensive food, moving children to less expensive school, and opting for less expensive medicine. And further, household took multiple measures, like people were going to 59% of population was still going to work despite the lockdown. They were willing to sell their livestock or other assets, rely on government support, take loan, and use existing savings. During this time, government of Pakistan took multiple measures to mitigate all these challenges that were being presented to the poorer households. Passed in for this particular to put all this. Government of Pakistan has formed the ministry, PAS division, Poverty Alleviation and Social Security division, to consolidate all the social protection and develop programs under one umbrella. And Asas Emergency Cash Program is one of those programs. During the COVID pandemic, a special relief package worth approximately USD 70, which is PKR 12,000, were dispersed to deserving individuals. And from the survey that we conducted, we were able to see that 81% of the people surveyed were relying on that support from the government. Further measures that were taken by the government to mitigate the response are, as of January 2021, the government of Pakistan has approved an economic relief package worth $5 billion, out of which 1.1 billion will be provided to low-income groups. The multi-stipend and the basic income support program was almost increased from $12 to $17. And government of Pakistan has dedicated around USD 20.9 billion for the Kamyab Pakistan program, which is Successful Pakistan program, and it has 5 major which will serve 7 million families in the next 5 years. It has 5 components: Kamyab Karobar, which is successful businesses; Kamyab Kisan, successful farmers; Naya Pakistan, low house costing; New Pakistan, low house costing; Kamyab Hunarmand, successful skills development; and Sehatmand Pakistan, healthy Pakistan. Besides this, the government also initiated SA Street Hawkers Initiative for improving the ecosystem around formal economy or the street economy. We'll talk further about it in the coming slides. So when we come to So when we come to recommendation, we would push the government to keep on doing these, to keep on building on these measures: increase investment in agriculture, compensation insurance for losses to easy credit availability, investment in employment schemes such as employment guarantee scheme, temporary income support, employing active labor market policies, educating and training the population, subsidized employment or business support for rural people originating from rural areas, reforming business processes for small medium enterprises, and encouraging the informal street economy to enter into the formal economy. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Daniel. That was a very concerning statistic that you quoted earlier about the World Bank report. That poverty will be, the COVID-19 after effects will have implications on our livelihoods and economic status for the next 10 years. So I would like to now introduce Ms. Tamriz Khan for her presentation. Over to you, Ms. Tamriz.
Thank you very much, Amina, and Assalamu alaikum, and thank you to SDPI for inviting me to speak at this conference. My topic today is somewhat indirectly connected to rural poverty as a result of COVID-19. I'm going to speak today about labor migration from Pakistan and the impact that COVID-19 has had on labor migrants and their families in Pakistan. This is based on a paper that I wrote at the beginning of this year for the European University Institute in Florence, who were doing case studies on systemic resilience in labor migration governance systems as a result of COVID-19. And I used Pakistan as a case study because this issue is something that I think has not been highlighted enough as one of the fallouts of COVID-19 for the country. So just a little bit of background to start with. So Pakistan is the second largest migrant sending country in South Asia after India. We have approximately 11 million Pakistani labor migrants globally. Majority of them are labor migrants, and 90% of them are those who are employed in the Gulf states, primarily in Saudi Arabia and UAE, but also in other states such as Oman, Qatar, Bahrain, Kuwait, etc. They are mostly low-skilled or medium-skilled tradesperson who work in the construction industry primarily, and in low-scale jobs. Most of them go from central Punjab, so Sialkot, Gujranwala, those are the districts where most people migrate overseas for employment. Khyber Pakhtunkhwa is also another province which sends a lot of labor migrants overseas, primarily to the Gulf. Balochistan and Sindh, not much so. So obviously during COVID-19, we all know, as a result of the lockdowns and border closures, labor migrants all over the world were trapped in the countries that they were working in. And this was a major issue because it affected both not just the supply chain of the industries that they were working in, but also their own personal status and income. Because as the previous speaker has also said, that many people have lost their jobs. And so labor migrants who were working temporarily overseas in other countries, particularly the Gulf, also lost their jobs. So we saw this heightened state of insecurity during COVID-19 for labor migration all over the world. And a lot of it was associated with lost incomes. In the case of Pakistan, majority of our labor migrants in the Gulf, who were the only income earners for their families back in Pakistan, for the first part of COVID-19, they were stranded in the countries they worked in. And the repatriation efforts by Pakistan to bring them back to Pakistan was a very slow process. Initially, it didn't exist at all. And then gradually over several months, Pakistan started to fly back these stranded migrants back to Pakistan, because majority of them were sitting in these countries under in very unhealthy conditions, not being quarantined, being cattled into, particularly in the Gulf, who received a lot of criticism that a lot of the labor migrants that worked there were basically not even being provided any support or care. And they were basically just thrown out of their jobs and left out in the cold. So Pakistan slowly and gradually started to bring back its migrants from the Gulf. Upon return to Pakistan, majority of these workers had no jobs, and they had no other means of support other than the jobs that they were working in. So the Pakistan government, under its immigration laws, is technically obliged to protect its overseas migrant labor force and provide them with the economic opportunities upon their return. However, in this case, the government did not provide these returning labor migrants with any adequate facilities, compensation for lost income, or any alternative measures of income. So this took their households, a majority of who do belong to rural areas of central Punjab and KP, with absolutely no income whatsoever. Remittances sent by foreign workers to Pakistan is the main source of income for their families. And once they lost their jobs, their income and these remittances also stopped coming in. So there was this fear that there would be a severe decline in the remittances. Overall, Pakistan projected it as if, there will be a severe decline in remittances coming in, while at the same time not doing anything or providing any measures specifically for laborers coming home. A number of the measures that were mentioned by my colleague in the presentation earlier were for Pakistanis who were living and working in Pakistan. But there were no measures as such for those who were not living in Pakistan and who came back to Pakistan, losing the only job that they had. A lot of migrants were also irregular Pakistani migrant workers working abroad. And by irregular, we mean those who had not traveled overseas through the regular government channels provided by the Bureau of Immigration. And a lot of this is because a lot of these workers can't afford the process of finding an overseas employment promoter, having access to regular jobs in other countries. And so they choose an irregular process whereby a lot of unauthorized agents are paid a large amount of money and documents are prepared and then they're sent abroad to work. So these migrants are not registered in the Pakistani system at all. Yet they were also stranded abroad and had to be shuttled back, and they had absolutely no government assistance whatsoever. At least a lot of the formal labor migration that goes through government channels technically and theoretically had access to government assistance. The fact that they didn't receive it is a different issue, but these irregular migrant workers had absolutely no access to any sort of assistance. So this has created a great strain on the rural households that they worked in as a knock-on effect, because they also lost the only source of income that they had. And this is not just in Pakistan, this is all of South Asia. So other countries, sending countries like Nepal, India, Bangladesh were also in the same position. A lot of their overseas labor migrants were also stuck in other countries, primarily the Gulf. And they also lost all their jobs and their income. And there was a great uncertainty among them when they came back to Pakistan about whether they will be able to return to their jobs in the Gulf once the pandemic was over, or unless the pandemic was brought under control. I'd like to highlight this particular case because we don't talk about labor migrants as one of the employment sectors that Pakistan promotes. And it is a large part of the, we have 11 million people working overseas for us and sending a very high level of remittances every year. So they are a major employment source for the country. And the fact that they don't have access to adequate services, even though they are entitled to, is a major issue. And COVID-19 brought this heavily into perspective. Also, a lot of them are low-skilled workers. So they do not have access to more higher paying or better paying jobs when they come back to Pakistan. When they come back to Pakistan, a lot of them will have to integrate into the existing system of the informal workforce, particularly if they have lost all other means of income. Also, a lot of them, because they're low skilled, they are vulnerable because they have low wages to begin with. According to Pakistani standards, their wages may be high if they're working overseas, but overseas their wages are extremely low. They are exploited by employers abroad. They are not given benefits. They are not given proper living conditions. And a lot of their money, majority of it, 95% of it is sent back home to Pakistan to support their families. So they have pretty much no savings at all. So our economy being heavily dependent on remittances earned by these migrants is a big red flag, because households then go into poverty if they're not able to access this income. So it highlights an urgent need for labor, immigration, and protection policies in migrant sending countries like Pakistan to be better prepared to protect their most vulnerable but high remittance earning migrants in response to major external shocks. And a pandemic is one of those shocks that we were not prepared for at all. Secondly, most labor migration programs in Pakistan and also in other South Asian sending countries, labor sending countries, are of a temporary nature. So they always include a return to origin, i.e. these labor migrants will always have to come back to Pakistan. And even if they do, they can go back, but ultimately Pakistan is their final destination. So as a result, there's been very little focus on developing a coherent and integrated policy for such migration on behalf of both sending and receiving countries that looks at providing migrants with adequate rights and services. Migrant workers, we've seen, have played a key role in the provision of essential services in many receiving countries, and their rights such as housing, health, employment benefits, fair wages, visa regulation, etc., also need to be better integrated into labor migration policies, so that when a pandemic such or an external shock such as a pandemic occurs, that they have some level of protection for themselves and their families. So this lack of attention by sending states like Pakistan to ensure that their labor migrants are looked after or are taken care of or provided some assistance or protection when such global shocks happen is an important one that we need to underscore. And I think COVID-19 has shown us that if we don't do that, then we can be susceptible to more shocks. What also needs to be underscored is that while receiving states, such as the Gulf states, have access to more resources to bail out their own industries, which they have done in the Gulf, such as the construction industry, and they can manage labor shortages through other means, sending countries like Pakistan have no such measures to fall back on. So we have no such measures that will support our returning labor migrants in the event of a massive global external shock. Further, the dependence on remittances creates further pressures on sending countries to ensure that labor migration continues. So Pakistan government's focus was, how do we send back these labor migrants so they can start earning again? And that's not just because their families were suffering, but because also remittances add to national revenue and earning power. So this puts intense pressure on the migrants themselves, many of whom are unable to navigate these impacts of such shocks, including loss of employment and income, and that has a ripple effect on migrant households in Pakistan. Just an aside to say that Pakistan has been recording an extremely high level, an increase in remittances over the financial year 2020-21. And this has been touted as a success, despite the setbacks that labor migration has faced in Pakistan and number of migrants returning. We've recorded a 25% increase in the first 6 months of 2021 as compared to the previous year. Now, this I would just caution to look at. It's not necessarily because labor migrants have been able to go back to their jobs and continue sending money. In cases like this, a lot of labor migrants have to send all their savings back to country of origin, especially when they've lost their jobs, and especially when their families in Pakistan, other family members may have lost their jobs because of the pandemic and money is needed. So this inflow, massive inflow of remittances is not just because we've managed to maintain our labor migrants overseas, it's because labor migrants have had no choice but to send all the money that they've accumulated back to their families so they can just survive the pandemic. So I think this increase in remittances, which a lot of people point out as a good thing, needs to be looked at a little carefully. So I'll just like to end with saying that the role that labor migrants play in systemic resilience in societies during major shocks is not just influenced by the receiving country and the fact that they've had to shut down their industries, but also on the countries like Pakistan that send our migrants abroad. And that it is our responsibility to have a policy in place to support these migrants and to buffer the shock that they receive on return to Pakistan so that them and their households don't suffer. And I think this is a window of opportunity for Pakistan and other labor sending countries to strengthen these policies, to talk more about them and how we can effectively deal with external shocks in the future. Thank you very much.
Tamriz Saiba, very, very insightful discussion, very enjoyable, and certainly new information for myself and my colleagues. I don't think we have quite had, a discussion around, migration and how that's affected by COVID and how the families that are living in Pakistan and overseas both have been affected by COVID-19 and its impact on internal and external migration. Thank you so much. Let me now turn over to our final panelist, Mr. Syed Hassan. If I can turn this over to you, please.
Thank you, Amina, for the introduction, and thank you, SDPI, for inviting me to speak at this conference. I'll start off, if I'm allowed to share my screen, to just give you, an overview of how risk works, and then we can, share our learnings and how we function during the pandemic. So we started off back in 2014 and 15 as a student-powered movement, starting off from lumps. And the whole idea was that food shouldn't be wasted. And starting off a student movement, and if you look at what we've accomplished in the last 5 years, is that we have 22 different food banks in 5 different cities, and we're feeding a few thousand people every day. So why hunger? If we went down to our, the guide and what was his perspective on how to fight against hunger. There are millions and millions of people who are hardly, they can get a meal every day. So if that's the idea of Pakistan, even Qaid doesn't agree with that. Moving on, we started off with 3 founders who were undergrad students. We were, we were moved from one of our mothers, Josefa's mom, who runs a soup kitchen, serves almost 2,000 people every day. And being economists, all of us being economy students, the whole idea was to expand this and to create a bigger impact. So looking at the picture where Pakistan is at the moment, we're the 6th largest diaspora. We are one of the top most generous nations. And at the same time, we have 40 million people who are, 40% of our population is food insecure. So how does risk tackle that problem? We set up a food bank in different slums and different rural areas, which has 4 different products. Risk ration. Through this, you can support a family and adapt the family for 6 to 8 months, provide them with subsidized ration while they are given vocational training or provided with health. We cover the health shocks and everything. Second is Risk Bachao. This is our flagship program that caters to the excess food that is wasted. So again, emphasizing on this, 1/3 of all food produced is wasted. And using Risk Bachao, we almost feed almost 10,000 people every day. Next is Risk Deg. This uses the philanthropic vigor of our nation. We do almost $2 billion of food philanthropy every year. And using our technology and tech, we target these philanthropic endeavors and provide people with food. Finally is the school lunch program. And through this, right now, we are, as I said earlier, at 22 different food banks, 4 different cities. Finally, I would like to emphasize on the impact that we have made in this year. Through Risk Bachao, we've saved up to almost 500,000 kilos of food. We have saved 26.4 million worth of food. Through Risk Ration, we've given 1.5 million meals in this year, and through Risk Big and Risk Philanthropy, we've done almost 74,000 meals this year. This map gives you a picture of where we are serving. Finally, our partners, we have 45 youth chapters in all of the universities in the country. We have 50 plus nonprofit partners, 30 food banks, and 50 restaurants that are giving us their access. So the whole idea of risk was that in economics, we always read that there's a scarcity of resources. During our work with risk, we've learned that scarcity is a latter issue. The actual issue is the supply chain. And during COVID, this supply chain that the whole world faced a disruption in supply chain, we learned that if this supply chain is managed in a better way, we can actually provide the bottom of the pyramid. So to sum it all up, at Risk, what we're trying to do is that reach out to the people using technology on ground through these food banks, doing a robust analysis that provides you with MPIs and poverty scorecards of families that actually require help, and to reach them using technology. And that would be it from our end for now. Hello?
Thank you, Sayyid Hassan. We've had very, as you can see, we've had very diverse perspectives from the three panelists today. Our speaker, Danielle, spoke about the impact on the rural poor. Ms. Tambriz discussed the impact of COVID on labor migration and onward impact on the families who depend on them. And of course, Hassan recently spoke about the Citizens Initiative to respond through food distribution and leveraging youth and partners. Let me now turn this, let me turn it over to our guests and our colleagues in the room for any questions. You can type that in the chat box. As I've indicated, we have one question right now. This question is for Ms. Tambriz. It's a quite interesting insights on the impact of shocks on the migrant laborers and the context of the increase in remittances. You touched upon the systemic resilience, but could you talk a bit about specific interventions in the context of labor laws where development actors in Pakistan can also add value? Ms. Tambriz?
Yes, thank you for that question. Sidra, if I understand correctly, you're asking how can we use existing labor laws to support labor migrants better, if I understand correctly, labor migrants better in situations such as this, and how systemic resilience can be built into the labor system. My answer to that would be is that labor laws in Pakistan are very vague to begin with, and they don't necessarily include labor migration. I was part of the team that developed a draft labor immigration policy for the government of Pakistan a few years ago, and that's still in draft form. It has not been approved by the cabinet at the moment. But though that was separate from the existing labor laws, which apply mostly to domestic work within Pakistan, not international. And I think it's very, very important that we include labor migration overseas, labor immigration overseas in the ambit of our labor laws overall, because as you can see from this case, they completely fall through the cracks. We have a lot of systems in place, like the Bureau of Immigration, Overseas Immigration, the BEOE, that is responsible for sending labor migrants abroad of all skill sets, not just low skill, but high skill as well. That's how the government system works, that you've got to go through the Bureau of Immigration, through an overseas employment promoter to get employment and get permission from the government to proceed abroad. And the whole idea of that is that if you go through the government is going to protect you in case of any shock or harm. But unfortunately, in reality, that doesn't happen, as we've seen. We also have a lot of systems and processes and organizations such as the in Pakistan that are meant to support labor migrants when they return to Pakistan and reintegrate them. And that includes providing them with housing, providing them with investment opportunities, providing education to their children and their families, such as the Overseas Employment Foundation, the OPF. But again, in reality, a lot of these are not active to the extent that they need to be, and they certainly weren't active during COVID-19. So I think development organizations can play a role, but we don't have too many development organizations also in Pakistan that work for labor migration and labor migrants. I think that is a gap we need to fill. Also, if we're looking at labor laws, then we also need to include overseas labor migrants who go abroad for work, because at the moment they are not. And having a separate policy for them is very important. We've had 3 successive policies in Pakistan's history, but none of them have actually been implemented or enforced in Pakistan. So we just have these organizations that are there systematically and operationally, but we don't have a policy that governs them and brings them together. So I think that's someplace development organizations can possibly come in and lobby for better inclusion of labor migration policies into the overall employment policy of Pakistan, as well as work for labor migrant rights overseas and ensure that they are provided the services that they are entitled to under the government rules and regulations. We actually have an ordinance that governs labor immigration overseas, but again, very poorly implemented and not up to date at all. So I think that's where I think development organizations can play a very important role. Thank you.
Thank you, Tamri Saiba, for that, your insights. Just a question from my side for all 3 of our panelists. We've seen the devastating effects of COVID-19, and I think that's what we've been talking about for not just today, but over the last year, more than that. But has anyone seen any opportunities that came as a result of COVID-19? Any new initiatives, any new schemes, any new ways of thinking or innovations in the way that we respond to crisis that has come about as a result of COVID-19 that we can, maybe gain some traction on? Perhaps we can, maybe Tamriz or Hassan, if you want to respond to that.
Yeah, there's a question on the chat box for me as well. So I'll start with that and then come to your question. So the question is, what is your beneficiary targeting approach? So thank you for this question. So what we do is we go to a family's house, we do MPI, a multi-poverty index questionnaire, and then a poverty scorecard. So it's not just that risk is recommending a family for anyone's support. So you get a numerical value of how someone, what's the poverty level of someone or a particular family. And then for that particular family, we design an intervention that ranges from 6 months to a year. And in that 6 months to a year, we provide them with subsidized ration support. And in return, we demand from that family that their kids have to go to the school that is partnered with us within that vicinity. They have to, attain a certain skill. That could be any vocational skill or any of that sort. Ahuat being is our partner, gives them microloan. So the whole idea is to, number one, assess the family using MPI as a poverty scorecard, design an intervention for that specific family, which is tailor-made for that family, and then within 6 months to a year, they attain a certain skill level that they don't at least require that ration support of 4,000 to 5,000 rupees. So that's how we target our family and then graduate them out of that poverty level. And Amina, your question, our learning in this particular time was that a holistic, integrated approach to poverty is needed. Like a certain family, you provide them with ration support, you provide them with with a vocational training, you provide them with enrollment in the school. The same school gets a school a school lunch program. You provide them with a micro loan, and you literally hold that family's hand and graduate them out of poverty. And how are we doing it? By these brick and mortar structures in these communities that these people can approach to, tell their problem, and then experts over there, connected through technology and our solution and our app, can help them graduate out of that certain problem. We've been testing this model, which we call a social stock exchange model, in two of our vicinities, one in Liari and one in Islamabad. And the results have been remarkable because, a solution designed in Islamabad for a poverty-struck community in Bahawalpur doesn't work. So you have to go on ground, hold their hand, and graduate them out of poverty. That's our learning in the last year or 2 years. I hope I answered the question.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. That was very clear. And I think that replicates the PPAF model as well. Any other questions? I don't see any hands raised and nothing in the chat box either.
Ms. Amina, if you allow me, can I respond to the innovation or any smart solutions that were implemented during the COVID period in the past year?
Yes, please. Yeah, yes.
Yes, so this was also mentioned by His Excellency President Dr. Arif Ali during the inaugural session of the 24th Sustainable Development Conference, that while the whole of the world was deciding that whether we are going to go for a full lockdown or even if a lockdown is necessary, and they were fighting, they were sort of debating and arguing over the value that it is going to create and how many people are going to suffer, Pakistan had to make a very calculated decision and very sort of calculated decision and a very risky decision at the time, that we are not going to completely lock down the country. And if you remember correctly, it was really opposed at that time. I was one of the people actually who was opposing it at the time, but it worked out excellently in the end. The government went for smart lockdowns and targeted areas. So that especially sort of in our society and our socioeconomic structure, it gave us a sort of a window into dealing things with another way. Instead of closing everything down, we can sort of restrict it to a certain area and then impose smart lockdowns and then continue. And this strategy can be also utilized for any future pandemics that may come or any other diseases that may be spread through the masses. And this procedure implementation can be applied to other social protection programs as well. As Hassan mentioned, that you cannot apply the same program at one place for helping the ultra poor and the poor. So this is the same sort of strategy that we have to take forward and be smart about our policies that we are implemented, and we should localize them according to the targeted regions and the targeted districts. Thank you.
Thank you, Danielle. Any other questions from our panelists or the floor? I think there's one more, perhaps a comment. I have seen the government of Pakistan and other organizations rely more on technology and data-driven decisions in COVID-19 response than ever before. That's a positive change. Okay, right. That's a comment from our colleagues, Aisha Salma. So if there are no further questions, let me turn the discussion over to our final, to our esteemed chairperson, Ms. Roshan Khurshid Barocha, for her concluding remarks, and then we close this discussion. Over to you. Ms. Roshan, I think you're on mute.
Oh, sorry. I'm so sorry. Just listening to all the three presentations, I really feel the research has been done so well. Danielle speaks about how in COVID, like so many people died, daily wages, people had such a lot of problem. I could imagine that being in Balochistan especially, and how people had faced a lot of problems, one after the other. We went through all a lot of problems, especially I felt about the daily wages people who were earning on daily wages, and They had no money, no income. Then the private sector started cutting up money of the people who were working, employees' salary to 10% instead of increasing. So a lot of trouble. We had gone through a lot of trouble. She raised about the labor migration. I can imagine what problems they had faced, the family had faced, because our people also from Cage, those people who had gone from Oman to Dubai and places being drivers and all over there, and all of a sudden never dreamt of what was going to come up, and all of a sudden everything came down and they had to come back. So that was, I agree with her, there should be laws and it should have been made before, but anyhow, we learn lessons from whatever comes up. And Hussain, oh, that touched my heart about the food and the way they are working and the food bank and all. I think it's so good. We are feeding poor people. And the best thing what he said was very much interesting, was that they give food to the families, and in return they ask them to send the children to school, let the boys and girls learn vocational or technical. That's a very good thing, you know, to give some initiative. Yes, we give them, and we don't try to make them beggars, but we try to give them some initiative that you have to go forward and do something about it. It was really very good. And I think it's an eye-opening for all of us. It's an eye-opening for the government and ourselves. But one thing I would like to say here, that this ESAS program has been very successful program. And poor people have been getting money, and not that they had gone through a lot of problems and all. I've seen it with my own eye, they got the money, and it was a very systematically done. NGAP program of PPF is doing very good, going out to household, looking at people, measuring their poverty, and then working, giving them assets and all. As in the pandemic, agriculture went down, livestock went down, everything came to an end. But we really wish, I feel, we have learned where our mistakes were, and I'm sure, I hope we don't face such sort of problems anymore. But anyhow, we should go forward, and wherever we couldn't do things, we should do it now. So I must thank all of you for your very good presentation. I myself had noted down a lot of points, which I feel, which is going to help me also, that how can we go about after this pandemic. Thank you very much, all of you.
Madam Chairperson, thank you so much for your wisdom and for gracing this session. And I appreciate and acknowledge the wonderful perspectives of our three panelists. And thank you again to all that have participated and kept this very lively and interactive discussion. So with that, let me conclude and wish you all a good afternoon. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Oh, sorry, one moment, please, one moment. It's just a request, if everyone can please turn on the cameras for our final, photo opportunity for SDPI and PPAF. Let me turn mine on as well. Okay.
And Amna, you've been an excellent moderator.
Thank you so much.
Good. And if I can, on this request, Hassan, if I can have his number, because what he's doing, because we also in SOS Quetta, what we are doing is also this food panda people also give us the leftover foods for our children, SOS, whatever, they don't throw it, they bring it to us. So I felt when I heard this about his, I was really much interested. Very good program, something very new. And I think this we should do it in Balochistan also. I think it was excellent. It touched my heart.
Thanks a lot for the kind words, ma'am. So just focusing on that food panda that you mentioned. So in Islamabad, every day 200 orders get cancelled, and 200 orders translate into 400 meals every day. And that's just Islamabad. I don't want to name any brands over here, but the leading hotels, every day they waste almost 2,000 to 3,000 kgs of food. And if we can, make them agree to all of that, like it took us 3 years to convince Subway to give us their bread that is then fed to old homes in Islamabad and Lahore. So thank you very much for the kind words, and we're doing what we can. And another example is airlift. They give us in Karachi, they give us every day, they give us a ton of food that is wasted. Every day, that's a ton of food. That's almost like 1 kg is equal to 3,000, sorry, three meals. So just you can do the math. So definitely, I can, if you allow, I can write the number over here or whatever is the way. You can ask the STPI
Sure,
people,
please.
and I would
Please,
definitely
that would
love
be
to come
very
see you
good,
and
very
discuss
good.
this in detail.
Sure, sure. Thank you. Thank you
Thank
for
you
a
very
good
much.
work.
So nice of
Keep
you.
it up. Keep it up. Good.
Thank you. So nice. Thank you.
Thank you all. Thank you all. Have a good afternoon. Bye.
Cheers.